Karen Kubby is a longtime political activist in the Iowa City area, former member of the Iowa City City Council, and now the owner of Beatology, a retail store in downtown Iowa City. And the first thing I would like to ask you, Karen, is now that the municipal elections of 2015 are over, what can we look forward to? What kind of reforms are you looking forward to, if any?
Well, first I want to say that I was really pleasantly surprised with the sweep of the Core Four. It was unexpected by myself. I think it was unexpected by the Core Four, but I'm really pleased because I think the community is going to be pleasantly surprised that not only will the issues that they talked about be formulated into policy over time, but I think their process of good government is going to be great. One of the first things I'm looking forward to is something that I've worked on for a long time, and that is the process of the mayoral selection. It is quite opaque. It happens completely behind the scenes. And what happens, there's a public meeting where the results of that opaque process are announced through a vote. And I'm hoping with the Core Four that that process will become more transparent.
Okay, well, when the mayor is elected, the mayor is elected by the city council.
And I would say that the mayor is selected from amongst council members, although
yes,
there is a vote.
That's true, but there is a vote, and the vote is made public, is it not?
It is. It's done at a public meeting.
Right.
But the discussions about why someone should be mayor or shouldn't be mayor is done completely behind the scenes.
Cannot an individual or a group get in touch with one or more members of the city council and ask them to support a particular person for mayor?
Absolutely. And I don't know how often that happens, but it absolutely could happen.
Okay. So there are sometimes disputes among the city council as to who the mayor should be, correct?
Yeah. I think for me, what I would be looking for is what do we need from a mayor the next 2 years? Because in different generations of councils, the community needs different things. There are different issues that come up. There are different kinds of public processes that are needed to go through. And so one person who's a good mayor for one set of 2 years might not be the best council person to be mayor the next 2 years. And so I would like to hear from the council what they think they need from a mayor, and then the people who want to vie to be mayor can talk about why they fit the bill.
Okay, as I understand it, though, the mayor does not really have a lot more power than another member of the city council. Am I correct?
They don't, but they certainly are the leader of the leaders. They are in charge of the public process at meetings, and they can control the agenda. The charter allows the mayor to add things to the agenda. Okay,
so you want more transparency in the election of the mayor. Are there any matters of policy that you would like to see changed, that you would hope that the council would act upon in the next couple of years?
I think this election that happened yesterday was really a community discussion, not about whether or not we're going to have higher density development in the core of the city. I think there's no doubt that that needs to happen, and every candidate was for it. I think the discussion is it this high or is it this high? But that it's all going to be higher density. I think the other point of discussion that I heard was about public assistance for private enterprise. And how is that going to be provided, under what circumstances? I've always held the view that the community really needs to get things that it can't otherwise get through the private free market system in order for a private for-profit entity to receive public assistance.
Okay, and what would some of those things be?
Well, for me, that might be affordable housing, and be clear about what that definition is. What is the percent of median income of people who would be living there? And I'd prefer that to be 50 to 80%. I think especially south of Burlington Street, I'm getting very concerned about affordable commercial space. For example, across from the train station, there's a commercial building that's been there for a long time. Rent is really cheap, and there are some critical community businesses there. There's a hair braiding place. There's the shoe doctor, who's an awesome shoe repair person and has a great crew over there, and places like Alterations that are small businesses. They're really vulnerable to increased rents, and when that cheap space gets replaced with expensive space, where are they going to go? And will they end up going out of business? So I'd like to see some assistance when long-term businesses that have been in one area can't afford to go back into that area. What can the city do to make those businesses survive?
Okay, what would that assistance look like?
Well, I don't really know what the options are. I think there's lots of communities across the country who have done things like that when there's been redevelopment and or gentrification, and people who could pay the lower rent can't pay the higher rent. And we should be looking at those examples. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel.
Okay, well, you were on the city council for more than 10 years, I believe, from 1989 to 2000.
Indeed.
So that's like 2.5 terms, more or less?
Yeah, almost.
Okay.
Or a little more, actually, yeah.
All right, and what were some of the changes that you were responsible for or that you helped support during that time on the council?
Well, no one person can do anything alone. So when people claim they made something happen, it's not true. Because as I say, the bottom line is on the city council, when you have 7 members, it takes 4 votes to make something happen or not happen. So nobody did anything alone. Some of the things that I was a strong advocate for and organized in the community around was keeping public transit as affordable as possible and as convenient as possible. Certainly affordable housing, which I was working on before I got on the city council with a direct vote and a voice there. And the sensitive areas ordinance was something that I was very, very concerned about and was quite outspoken on.
And what is the sensitive areas ordinance?
So that's an ordinance that says that if you're going to develop a property, you have to preserve groves of trees, steep slopes, prairies, wetlands, and a whole lot of other sensitive areas that are defined by the ordinance.
Okay,
and so you have to develop around them and incorporate those features, or you need to stabilize the slopes so that there's not erosion.
Okay, and how do you define affordable housing, and what did the affordable housing that you helped to bring in end up looking like?
Well, just because I advocated for it doesn't mean that it happened. So I feel like we're in worse shape with affordable housing than we were 20 years ago. And to me, that's...
I think a lot of people on all points of the political spectrum would probably agree with you on that.
So I would define affordability of housing. It's very unique to a household. So across the country, people use the percentage of 30% of your income is the maximum you should spend for housing and utilities together. And so there's your definition. And a lot of the ways that the community defines it is by percent of median income. And so there are some programs where your percent of median income determines what kind of programs that you can be part of for affordable housing.
Okay, and these people that occupy this housing, are they locals generally? We hear the euphemism, people from Chicago, a great deal.
We do, and really the euphemism is really about people of color. That's how I interpret it, and I find it quite offensive. And first of all, I don't feel bad about people moving. We have freedom of movement in this country. And so when people are trying to find a better life for themselves and their families and they choose Iowa City, I'm okay with that. I hope that they will do the best that they can to be great residents, get involved in the community, have a job, and do the best for their kids that they can do and make sure their kids get an education. But for people who are having trouble with housing, we've got the Section 8 program that is a federal program, but the private sector makes a lot of money from housing in our community. And I believe those private developers should contribute to increasing the numbers of affordable housing. And one of the ways people across the country have done this in a very even way so that all developments have to abide by it is mandatory inclusionary zoning. And that's something that when I was on the council in the mid-90s, when Throgmorton was in his first term, we talked a lot about fair share housing. And so for new developments, this would mean some percentage of units developed, whether they're multifamily housing, duplexes, or single family housing, would have to be affordable under certain guidelines.
So you
That
mean to
did-
tell me that if I were a developer and I were developing a super luxe block of apartments, I would still have to include a certain percentage of affordable units even in that very luxurious development?
You would, and when you go to communities across the country, you can't, when you go to a development that had mandatory inclusionary zoning and we walked down the street or bicycled or rode down the street, you wouldn't be able to point out the affordable units in there. Developers are motivated to make sure that they look good, that they fit into the community and into their development. And statistically, when you look at research about affordable housing, mandatory inclusionary zoning puts all the developers on an even playing field, so everyone's equally responsible under the same rules, and it is the way that you get increased numbers of affordable units in your community. Voluntary programs do not work. And the nonprofit private sector cannot produce the number of units that are necessary in our community.
Okay, well, if voluntary cooperation doesn't work, might that not be an indicator that it's just not a popular program and that you're trying to ram something down people's throats?
I would say that the profit motive in this case is more important than the community benefit, and inclusionary zoning balances those two values.
Wait, you're saying that the profit motive outweighs community values, or did you mean
Yes,
to say
I say that with voluntary programming, the motivation for profit rises above what the community is needing, and that.
But who decides what the community needs? You?
Whoever's in the majority of policymakers, I suppose. That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
I mean, when you just look at the research, the number, I mean, we just need thousands of units of affordable housing that aren't here, and it means people who work here can't live here, and it becomes a closed border. When you have a policy that doesn't facilitate voluntarily and or mandatorily affordable housing, it means we basically have a closed border.
Okay. Some people would argue that it might be desirable to maintain a certain demographic and not just invite anybody to come in for the sake of inviting them. What would be your response to that?
I would say we should be a community for all kinds of people, and that makes us actually a stronger, safer, and much more interesting community to live in.
How stronger and safer? I mean, these are subjective points, arguably.
Yeah, I want to live in a community that isn't all one kind of people. That there are people of different economic and social statuses with different kinds of educational backgrounds that have different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, and it just makes all of our lives much more interesting.
Okay, some people would argue, though, that by bringing in a certain demographic that was not here before, we have now more crime, more noise, more polarization amongst the people of Iowa City. I'm not taking that position necessarily, but I am hearing it a great deal.
Well, people do like to create urban myths and then perpetuate them. So part of the angst about this discussion is we have people who are native Iowa Cityans, right? And that they need some social assistance. They need help economically, mental health services, food assistance, transportation assistance. And so as our community is pulled together to help those residents, other people come in organically because they're seeing this community not necessarily for the assistance, but they're seeing this as a good place to raise their family. Some of those people who come may end up needing some of that public assistance. So do we stop public assistance for everybody?
Do they not come here for public assistance?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, I'm not a social worker. I don't work in Section 8 housing, so I can't really say what people's motivations are across the board. I think there's always going to be people who shop around. I think that that's part of what happens when you have freedom of movement in a country. I also think people are coming here because we have a great school system and that it's an interesting community and they want to avail themselves of this. We have seniors who move here because there's access to health care. There's interesting things going on. They can live close to downtown, not need a car, and can walk around and have a lot of things happening. some of those individuals might need some public assistance as well.
Okay,
So do we say no seniors because we don't want those people coming in?
I don't think anybody is saying no seniors, no black people, no Hispanic people, or anything of that sort. This has never been, as far as I know, a segregated town. But I think that the objection might be that we are encouraging elements that we might not find desirable to come into this town and maybe take over some neighborhoods, maybe take over portions of the government. Those are the arguments I'm hearing.
So what are the motivations that are out there? I mean, what are the goodies that are out there that are motivating people to come here?
That I couldn't tell you, except that one hears that the availability of affordable housing is higher here than elsewhere. As far as public assistance programs are concerned, those tend not to be municipally administered.
But when you look at the Section 8 list, you have to be a resident. You have to live here for a year. And there's such a long waiting list that you would have to wait like 3 years to get on Section 8 housing. So even, let's say some people from all over the country come here to get Section 8 housing, they're going to be disappointed.
Right. And I think that the objection is not so much to the people who come here, establish themselves, and then qualify for Section 8 housing. The argument that I hear is that they then invite their friends, families to come here temporarily, and they are often the people who break the law, create a nuisance, whatever. This is just what I'm hearing.
There are plenty of native Iowacitians who break the law.
That's true. That's not quite to the point, however. The point that I'm hearing from a lot of people is that by taking this attitude, by allowing Section 8 housing to proliferate, you are encouraging the less desirable elements to come into this town and create a negative influence.
But people who come here can't walk in, fill out an application, and get a Section 8 voucher. They have to be here a
Exactly,
year,
that's
and
what
then they have to wait 4 years.
I was just saying that.
So it's really a misnomer. It's
well,
not how it works.
I was just conceding the point that people do establish themselves here and then qualify for Section 8 housing, and that's fine. Most of them are quite respectable people. I'm talking about the people who follow along behind them.
But then they have to establish themselves.
But they're often transients who come in here temporarily, then go back to wherever they are and sort of filter in and out. And these are often the people who end up on the police blotter.
And so we shouldn't have affordable housing programs because of that potential for a few people to cause some problems.
I'm not saying that. I'm asking you. I'm asking you, did you not foresee this when you promoted the growth of these affordable housing programs?
I think that
Or did you wish to have it happen?
There is such a need for affordable housing for all kinds of people that we need to keep figuring out how to make it happen for our community.
Okay. Some people would say that by bringing in certain demographics, you're merely cementing your own political power by bringing in these extra voters who you know are going to vote for you.
Yeah, people give me way too much credit for being Machiavellian. It's just not how my mind works.
Okay.
I mean, it's the same as saying, well, she wants to bring certain people in because they bead, and so she's going to,
No.
you know, I mean, it's pretty ridiculous.
We're not talking, I don't think, about any individual's personal power. We're talking about the furtherance of a certain political agenda. And you have, let's face it, been known for a very long time for your political agenda. I mean, I can remember seeing your name in the papers back in the 1970s at the latest.
I absolutely have a political agenda, and I'm glad when the community can know what it is, because people who are involved in the political realm, you have an agenda. You want to accomplish something for your community. So your agenda is either hidden, or if you don't have one, I don't think you really have any. Why are you there? It's kind of psychotic to not have some goals that you want to accomplish for your community. And so when people talk about agenda, sometimes there's this negative connotation. It's like, yes, I have an agenda. I want people to have access to education, to have a floor of economic stability, to have access to health care, to have housing and food and art and beauty in their lives. I have an agenda, absolutely.
Okay. All right. There was always education in this town, though, was there not? Tell me about some of the activities that you were involved in furtherance of this agenda before you were on the city council. Take us back to like the 1960s, 70s, whenever you started becoming more active in this community.
I would probably say in terms of, because I'm a UI alum, and I came back here in 1978, and probably one of the first things that I got involved in is resistance to registration for the draft in the late 70s. And was also involved in an alternative orientation for new UI students. We called it disorientation, and we talked a lot about the kind of the leftist political groups on campus and what issues they were talking about. I was involved in the Nestle boycott for quite a while. I was an organizer in the Midwest for the Nestle boycott. My mother, who was a very loyal brand user of L'Oreal products, actually stopped using L'Oreal because they were part of the Nestle family of companies.
My goodness, what did Nestle do that was so nefarious?
Well, they were involved in getting women in third world countries to use their Nestle formula, and did not give them enough, or people couldn't afford enough. And they would stop lactating, but the only water first they couldn't afford all the formula, so they would stretch it so it was thinned, and then it was mixed with tainted water. And so children were dying all over the world, and Nestle knew it. And the boycott after many years was quite successful. And they changed their ways, and my mother was very happy to go back to using L'Oreal products.
Okay. And were you not involved in the Emma Goldman Clinic here as well?
I was. When I was in probably 1980 or so, was a volunteer for the Emma Goldman Clinic, and I never told my mother this at the time. She would have not been happy, but there were times when there were threats of fire bombings, and at that time, the anti-choice movement was not interested in hurting people. They were okay with hurting property, and so we would stay up all night at the Emma Goldman Clinic with all the lights on, and so that they could see that there were people inside, so that the clinic would be safe from the threats of fire bombings.
Okay.
And then many years later, I became the director in 1999 of the Emma Goldman Clinic and was the executive director there for 10 years.
Okay.
It was an awesome job. I felt like I was helping people become stronger selves, learning about their bodies, wanting to learn about their sexual health, and helping them take control of their fertility. It was a really wonderful place to work.
Okay. And this was toward the end of your time on the Iowa City Council, correct?
Yes, it was. There was about a 3 or 4 month overlap, maybe.
Okay. And then when you stepped down from your position with Emma Goldman, was that when you founded Beadology?
Well, actually, I was still working at the clinic, and I was wanting to find more artwork in my life. It was starting to wane, and it was bothering me, because I'm an artist. Right. I've been a potter and a beadworker, a potter since 1980, a beadworker since I was in 6th grade. My grandmother taught me to bead, and I've been beading ever since. And I was looking to teach at the local bead store. And in talking with the former owner, she said, I don't want you to teach at the bead store, I want you to own the bead store. And I had this very excited reaction. So I ran a bunch of numbers. It was a failing business. I was figuring out if I thought that I could turn it around or not, and took a risk and bought the business.
Okay, and you're using bead as a verb, and I suppose the mental image that comes immediately to mind is simply stringing beads onto a thread of some kind. There's probably a lot more to it than that, am I right?
There is. It can get as intricate as you want it to.
Okay, and aside from the obvious necklaces, bracelets, earrings, and so forth, what are some of the other objects that you can produce through beadwork?
Well, my sister beads these amazing boxes that are very geometric, and when you put the lid on, the pattern, which is highly patternized, on the box it fits perfectly. It doesn't, there's perfect segue between the bottom and the top. She's in a bead architecture. She's a phenomenal beader. So really you can, there's a group of people who are making life-size coral reefs out of beads. I mean, it's just incredible what you can do. So it's kind of funny, but I really think my work at the Emma Goldman Clinic and my work at the bead store is a little bit similar.
Okay, and explain that.
So our job at the bead store, as it was at Emma, is to listen to people really carefully and understand what they're trying to accomplish. And then we help give them the tools to accomplish what they want to. But at the bead store, you get to keep your pants on.
Okay. And beads can be made of just about any material. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. Anything that has a hole can be called a bead.
Okay. And is it an expensive hobby?
Well, you can make it as affordable or as expensive as you want. And so because of my political viewpoints, it translates into how I have my inventory. So I have very affordable strands of beads and individual beads, and then we have some higher end things as well. So I want to make sure that anybody could become a beader and not be stymied by an economic barrier.
Okay, what are some of the most surprising things that you can think of that about the bead business or about beadology that somebody walking into your store or asking you about beading would not expect to hear?
Well, we do a lot of repair work, and some of it is complicated. Repair work is very complicated, and so we call ourselves MacGyverettes because we have to get from point A to point B securely and aesthetically. And sometimes we have to use bubble gum and duct tape, like MacGyver, to figure out how to do that in a way that the customer can afford. So it's a huge challenge for us all the time when people bring repairs in. The other thing I think about is helping family history. So a customer came in with a pair of earrings that were in very bad disrepair, and she wanted them redone for her wedding. And it was a very odd stitch that I just happened to know, and I just had happened to make a pair of earrings using that stitch so I could recognize what was happening with these earrings right away. This was going to be the 7th generation of women who had been married wearing those earrings.
Oh my gosh.
So I got to redo the earrings and get them ready for the next 7 generations, and it was really pretty awesome to be part of that family event in that way.
Okay, and do you offer classes, workshops, what have you, in beading?
Yeah, we do. We actually have glass classes, metalworking classes, Viking knit, chainmail, seed bead weaving.
Chainmail.
Chainmail. Yeah, and we're not necessarily making armor, we're making bracelets and other things, but teaching a stitch that you could make armor with.
That's not a bad idea, I think, sometimes. And your store is located on Washington Street, sort of between where the Astro Theater used to be and where Barbara's Bake Shop used to be,
Yeah,
am I
it's
right?
actually in where Barbara's used to be.
Oh, okay.
So we're directly across from the Englert Theater at 220 East Washington Street, and we're open 7 days a week because there are a lot of people who need that amount of time to be able to have time to get to the bead store.
Okay. Well, that's probably a pretty good point on which to call the show to an end. And on that note, then, I will say thank you very much,
Great.
Karen Kubby,
Thanks,
for
Joseph.
being on the show. And thank you all.